Last week, a young man asked me what my best investment had been, and I told him no, that he was asking the wrong question. What is interesting is not the investments I made, but the ones I never made. Because most people go broke not because of what they buy wrong, but because of everything they buy right, but shouldn't have bought at all. And that is something almost nobody understands, because we live in a culture that confuses being busy with being productive and spending money with making investments. I am 99 years old, and I have seen thousands of smart people destroy their financial future with decisions that seemed perfectly reasonable at the moment. And the funny thing is that it is always the same 7 investments over and over again, generation after generation, as if the human brain came factory programmed to make exactly the same mistakes. 1. Buying a new car every few years. The first investment I never made was buying a new car every few years. This sounds trivial, but it isn't at all, because a new car loses between 20 and 30% of its value in the first year. That means if you pay $30,000 for a car, in 12 months you have given away between $6,000 and $9,000 to the dealership and the market, simply for the pleasure of debuting something that does exactly the same thing as a 2-year-old car that costs half as much. I know a guy, let's call him Robert, who for 30 years of his adult life bought a new car every 4 years, always financed. If you run the numbers, Robert spent approximately $200,000 on cars. His neighbor, James, bought used cars, maintained them well, and spent maybe $80,000. If James invested that difference, $10,000 saved periodically, in an index fund with an 8% return, that money would have turned into more than $400,000. Robert ended up with a car worth $1,000. James ended up with a car worth $1,000 and $400,000 in investments. Robert thought a car was a statement of who you are. James understood it was a tool to get from A to B. 2. A house that was too big. The second investment I never made was a house that was too big. People get very emotional here because in our culture, a big house is synonymous with success. But math is brutal and doesn't care about your emotions. A house isn't just the purchase price, it's maintenance, taxes, utilities, insurance, repairs. I saw this with 2 colleagues in the 60s. One bought a modest 150-meter squared house. The other bought a 300-meter squared house to impress clients. The one with the big house paid 3 times more in taxes, double in maintenance, and spent 35% of his gross income on that house, compared to 20% for the modest one. That 15% difference invested over 30 years represents millions of dollars in net worth difference. Plus, the first guy lost 2 hours a day commuting, almost 2 full years of his waking life over 30 years, just to impress people he probably didn't actually care about. 3. Expensive college education without ROI analysis. The third investment I never made was paying for an expensive university education without doing the return on investment numbers. A $100,000 education that leads to a $40,000 a year job is a terrible investment compared to a $20,000 education that leads to the same job. Yet families go into debt for brand names. What really makes the difference is how hard you work and how well you think. If you start your adult life with $80,000 in student debt, you lose the most valuable decade of compounding you will ever have. I've seen 2 people with the same ability. One graduates with debt, the other without. 20 years later, the difference in net worth is hundreds of thousands of dollars because one could start investing at 22 and the other couldn't until 35. Those lost years are irreversible. 4. Trendy businesses or fads. The fourth investment I never made was putting money into trendy businesses. In the 90s, it was the internet without profits. In the 2000s, it was real estate. In the 2010s, it was crypto. The logic was always, this is the future, get in or get left behind. But if you don't understand how a business generates money sustainably, it's not an investment, it's a bet. Warren and I missed the tech bubble. We were criticized as old. Then the NASDAQ fell 80%. We kept investing in boring businesses that made money. Predictability of return is more important than the rate of return because compounding only works if the return is consistent. Losing 30% after gaining 50% is mathematically worse over time than gaining a steady 10%. 5. Spending money to impress others. The fifth investment I never made was spending money to impress others. This is the biggest trap. Clothes, expensive restaurants, vacations you can't afford. It has a negative return and a huge opportunity cost. I knew a doctor earning $200K who saved nothing because of his lifestyle. I knew a school teacher earning $50K who saved 20%. 30 years later, the teacher was a millionaire. The doctor had $500K. Real rich people don't usually look rich. They're people who don't spend everything they earn on looking rich. I drove the same car for 20 years and lived in the same house for 50 years. Every dollar not spent on nonsense is a dollar compounding for you. 6. Investing in things I didn't understand. The sixth investment I never made was investing in things I didn't understand. If you can't explain in simple terms how an investment works, how it makes money, and what the risks are, don't put your money there. I've seen people lose fortunes in sophisticated-sounding black boxes. Usually, the person selling it makes a commission regardless of whether you make money. Their incentives are not aligned with yours. Real money is made by understanding a business well and letting time do the work, not by jumping into exotic investments. 7. Investing time in things without compounding effect. The seventh and probably most important, investing my time in things that have no compounding effect. Time is the only resource you cannot recover. Every hour watching TV is an hour not learning. I spent decades reading and studying psychology, business, and models. Knowledge compounds just like money. One book helps you understand the next. I saw two lawyers in the 50s. One studied every night, the other sought entertainment. 20 years later, the student was a senior partner handling complex cases making millions. The other was average. The difference was the compounding of knowledge. Conclusion: the math of freedom. Wealth isn't about how much you earn, but how much you keep. A guy earning $50K and saving $10K for 40 years ends up with $2.5 million. A guy earning $200K and spending $190K ends up with almost nothing. The mistake is thinking you have time to fix finances later. Compounding needs decades. If you waste your 20s and 30s, you lose the most powerful window. A 25-year-old investing for 10 years and then stopping will have more money at 65 than someone who starts at 35 and invests until 65. I prefer to have options. Real freedom isn't buying what you want, it's not having to do what you don't want. I know miserable billionaires and free people with modest net worths. The question isn't how much money you need to be happy, but how much to be free. If you avoid these 7 mistakes and focus on boring, predictable compounding, you will end up in the top 1%. It requires patience and being willing to be different.